Welcome to Grounded, Not Divided, a podcast about leaders who are getting important things done in the real world. I'm Matt Burgess. My guests on this show all have hard-won real-world experiences. Experiences that shed light rather than heat on society's most vital issues. Today's guest is Scott Beaulier. Scott Beaulier is the H.A. Dave True Family Dean of Business at the University of Wyoming. He was previously Dean of Business at North Dakota State University, where he was the youngest business dean in the country. He has written about higher education reform, and he writes the Arena Substack about institutions that shape economic and public life. We discuss the challenges facing business schools and higher education in general, his approach to leadership, and marathon running. He just ran Boston for the 5th time. Scott Beaulier, welcome to Grounded, Not Divided.
Hey, Matt. Great to be on.
So most of our listeners don't know you as well as I do. So can you start by telling us a bit about yourself? For example, where did you grow up, and broadly, how did you end up in academia?
Matt, I'm almost Canadian. So I grew up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a small town named Iron Mountain, Michigan, which is famous for Tom Izzo and Steve Mariucci, two of the sons of Iron Mountain. Kind of a gritty iron town that has about 20,000 people, and had a fabulous childhood. You know, I'm writing more about it because I'm growing nostalgic, I think, but just grew up hanging out with an amazing group of kids. It was an area in the background that was quite poor and socioeconomically depressed, but nonetheless just an amazing childhood. First in my family to ever pursue higher education, first to secure a degree at a regional university close to home, and never in my wildest dreams did I imagine a career in higher ed. But I had an amazing economics professor, and give him a lot of credit as, like, you know, in the Mount Rushmore of my life of people who have had tremendous influence, and saw something in me that I didn't in terms of my potential, and mentored me, and took me under his wing and helped me pursue a life of the mind in terms of opportunity studying. And I ended up moving on to George Mason University for my advanced training in economics, and it's been a dream ever since. Happy to dig more into it, but first gen student, so this is something that's very important to me personally, is just trying to help others at least have an opportunity. And, you know, something you and I talk about a lot, Matt, is access is only part of it. It doesn't mean you're going to realize a great outcome. And when you're open, like we are at University of Wyoming, and driving and advancing access, there's no guarantee that you're going to get through. In fact, the odds are not very great for first gens in terms of career outcomes and success. But we ought to have gates that are quite low to at least give people the freedom to try. And I feel very fortunate about my own experience that I've been able to realize that. And it's really been one of the motivators for me in this career in higher ed leadership, is trying to help others realize their full potential and have a chance.
Yeah, that's great. A couple things. One, I believe we've talked about this before. You are entitled to become Canadian if you want to, under a new law that was passed. The new law says that as long as you can prove you have a direct ancestor who's Canadian, you are entitled to be Canadian. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, your first gen point, I think, is super important. And it's not just, you know, resources and preparation. It's also things that people call the hidden curriculum. I also think of my dad. My dad's a professor, but he was first gen. And he said that he almost went to the University of Toronto at Scarborough for undergrad because he liked the song Scarborough Fair. Which is like,
no idea.
You know,
yeah.
And UTSC is a, you know, perfectly good school. So, you know, he would have turned out fine. But it's stuff like that I think people who aren't first gen, who sort of aren't close to it, don't think about, you know, beyond the other challenges.
Yeah, you really have no idea what you're facing. I didn't know what a registrar's office was as an undergraduate.
Yeah.
Like what is this? A FAFSA form was completely foreign to me. The notion that you had to fill these out to potentially get financial aid, I was completely on my own. So the barriers are very high, and you don't even know how it can set you up for more limiting futures because of the choices that you make. So in my case, it's a convenient school that allowed me to work almost full time while attending classes, and that was it. That was the only reason I ended up there as an undergraduate. And it worked out. But what if we were more systematic about trying to advance opportunity for these students that we know are facing added barriers and challenges and just basic confusion, and what potential can be realized from it. Matt, as I joke on Canada, I'm just waiting for us to take over your country so I don't have to fill out more forms. So it's coming.
Well, you might just have to fill out different forms if you're draft eligible. So be careful what you wish for.
True.
But just to be clear for our listeners, in all seriousness, that's not going to happen. There's not going to be a Canada-U.S. Hot battle. So shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to ask one follow-up question, or I guess two little follow-up questions about this economics professor who was super formative in your career path. First, would you mind naming them?
Oh no.
Uh,
Yeah, Dave Prochetko. He just recently retired this summer. He did work in the history of economic thought. He wrote a textbook as a co-author with Paul Hain that has a really popular following, actually, The Economic Way of Thinking. Just an outstanding, dynamic professor. Had a fair amount of success in his own writing too, and I caught him at just an amazing time, and took everything I could from him, and also just abused his office hours. Like every possible minute of office hour time was spent just peppering him with all kinds of nuanced questions, like the effects of the literature on the minimum wage, and what does Milton Friedman mean in his classic methodology essay, and just great stuff to
yeah.
engage in as an undergrad.
So let me ask you my other follow-up question, which is, besides just this great professor and the interest he took in you and the support that he gave you, was there a specific finding or insight or question that you learned about that made you think, gosh, I want to study economics for a living?
That's a really good question. I think it was just the applied policy implications at the microeconomics level that really opened my eyes. Seeing it was the logic of unintended consequences, and seeing
Yeah.
all of these really warm-hearted ideas that we might have, and genuine concern for different groups that we hold deeply, and realizing the best laid plans when it comes to like prohibition of alcohol don't turn out quite as intended, and just having this like poof, like I can't believe this, in your own work, Matt, like you can have the best of intentions with environmental climate policies, and not always going to turn out the way that you hoped. And in fact, you may backfire on some of your intended goals. And that logic in economics just it had me at hello, and was and then he was essentially the messenger or the conduit to a whole field that is
Yeah.
amazing.
And the climate point you made actually cuts both ways, right? So you can have green policies that have unintended consequences and the opposite. One of the things that I think is fascinating about the current US administration is that there's a case to be made that despite the rhetoric that they have on climate change, they may have accidentally lowered global emissions, for example, through the Iran war, which is driving up energy prices by way more than a carbon tax would. Um, by making China dump solar panels at basement prices on Africa because they are worried they're not going to be able to sell it to us anymore. And several African countries have had a like super exponential solar boom since the start of the administration. So all kinds of fascinating unintended consequences on both sides. Okay, so you go to grad school at George Mason. I believe Brian Kaplan was your PhD advisor. Some of our listeners will know who that is. Is that right?
Yeah, Kaplan was. I was a TA for him for 2 years. I ended up working under Pete Betke. Kaplan was on my committee, and Brian's great. And yeah, that George Mason environment is worth pausing and talking about just for a second. So I
Sure.
arrived there in 2000. James Buchanan was still active. He was older, but Nobel Prize winner for public choice. Gordon Tullock was hanging around, and Gordon had this seminar class that I took, and he probably should have won a Nobel for rent seeking, but he was just a really crotchety intellectual, and I don't think the Swedes liked him very much. There's a whole history of like maybe he was being
Yeah.
considered for it, and he insulted them. But his special topics public choice class was basically each day just getting grilled by Gordon on why all forms of government are really messy. So he'd start the class with what's so great about democracy, and then he'd just like say no, 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 no matter what you said, uh, he'd just tear it down, and it was fun. So yeah, Buchanan Tulloch there. Vernon Smith arrives in 2002 and then wins a Nobel Prize while I'm there. Tyler Cowen is just
Yep.
an 800-pound gorilla, but he hadn't even started blogging yet. So it's Tyler pre-blogging and pre-Marginal Revolution. Walter Williams is still there and really active. So an amazing environment to just continue to just drive on that the power of economic ideas and taking the economic way of thinking in whatever direction you might want to go. And in my case, I did a lot of work on economic development, and I spent some time in the field in Kenya and Botswana during my grad studies, and carved out some economic work in the area of development, just trying to raise my hand in some of the development debates. Early 2000s, if you remember this, Bono was a really big
Yep.
influence in the policy arena. And, we have to do such and such. If we just dump trillions of dollars into Africa, Africa will be rich. And it wasn't that simple. And there were economists, just raising their hands in that debate.
Yeah, I remember the Millennium Villages
Yes.
Project debate too, related. Okay, so you become an academic, and then not that long later, you become the youngest business dean in America, I believe in 2016 at North Dakota State University. Walk me through how that happens.
I don't know. So you wake up each day, not ever dreaming of being a dean or a higher ed leader, and now I'm reflecting. It's an interesting time to be on with you. I'm reflecting on 10 years of doing it now, and like I can think of all the deans that I had in that first stretch from 2004 when I finished my degree to 2016, and it's like, good God, I would never want to be there. And somehow along the way you stumble by accident into positions of greater responsibility. And each time I did that, one, I was competent and able to do the job. So then you have more work piled on you. Two, I found it kind of fun, and it felt like just this fast paced. Um, I always view it as somewhat of a startup feel, and that's very different from like the typical administrator's vibe. Yes, there's just grinding, horrible parts of the job, but the strategy, the trying to make heads or tails of different budget problems, the different puzzles that are thrown at you made it just a really rich experience for me. So I went the traditional route of just doing the research needed for tenure and promotion. Did some administrative work as a department chair, ran a couple of policy centers, which were really fun and helped me. In particular, the skill that they gave me was fundraising. Just driving an enterprise with a very laser focused mission that is relevant to outside parties. Along the way, I was doing media, which I think is amazing. The work that you do, Matt, to just try to bridge the gap between things you're thinking about and other audiences. I was writing weekly for the Birmingham News for about a year in one of my gigs, and all of that I think just helped. You know, uh, Hone the skills to be ready for a leadership job. Did I think I would be doing it at 30, 38 years old or whatever it was in 16? No, but it was amazing, and an amazing bet on some mentors and people who took a chance on the young guy with a lot of energy over the safe people in the pool. The other candidates I was up against probably smacked of this is the safe play. They took a chance on me, and I think it's been mutually beneficial in both places.
So you mentioned you've been a dean now for a decade. It's been safe to say a pretty interesting decade, probably, to be a higher ed leader. Like if you could pick a decade, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so let's start with business schools in particular, and then we'll broaden our view to academia as a whole. What are some of the biggest challenges you see business schools facing today? And how has that changed or not changed over the past decade? I'm guessing you're going to say some things like AI are new, but there's probably some other things that are not.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So I think business schools in general face this bit of an inferiority complex when it comes to some of the other colleges and disciplines around the university. We get kids jobs. We don't generate a lot of grant activity except for you all in economics. Business schools are kind of out of like, we're not even considered serious when it comes to research in many cases because it's different in terms of the quality and composition. Um, we teach lots of students. Like we're scaled like crazy in business schools, not only at Wyoming but around the country. And as such, we're viewed as tending towards like a trade school or a professional school that is just very practical and it's making the university money. And so I think what you get, and this is something that's withstood the test of time. It's been there all 10 years I've been a dean, and it's been there a long, long time. And in fact, it's been written about in higher ed literatures. Business schools aim to be extremely scientific, but let's remember that what we're actually there for in many cases is just this very practical value of getting students through and getting them jobs. So I think that that's a tension that we deal with on a daily basis in terms of faculty feeling like they're not getting enough love, in terms of like managing class sizes and enrollments and everything. One of the things that has changed in the more interim period of the last 10 years that I think is quite challenging for business is trying to connect what we're doing and making it coherent to audiences other than ourselves. And this is something that is not unique to business schools, but it's the entire literature on impact and thought leadership that our accrediting bodies are expecting of us. And it's really trying to address the so what question. So what is all of this research you're generating and what's it for? And we're pretty good at this at a land grant like University of Wyoming. We've got a lot of things coming out of economics that have a so what component to it. But there's been just an increasing pressure on business schools that I think is extending to the rest of campus as well on what are you doing with the knowledge you're creating and why does it matter for taxpayers who are footing so much of the bill. And that's probably the thing that's changed the most in my 10 years. You used to be able to just really focus on something in 2016, 2018, focus on something that was much more mechanical of have you published a couple of articles that are peer reviewed? Are you doing an okay job in your classes? Are you measuring what you're doing in your classes and closing the loop? And then your business school is okay. Now this added dynamic of what are you doing to change the world is really hairy and more of a challenge than 10 years ago.
Yeah, a couple of follow ups on that. I mean, one, the other people have written about this, so this isn't my idea or insight, but the what are you doing to change the world pivot is in some areas linked with then the critique of you're too liberal, you're too progressive, you're too activist, right? Because I think that in some fields, what are you doing to change the world? Naturally flows into, well, obviously we're, trying to make the world greener or, more socially just or whatever, right? And so you have a tension there. On, I think, the positive side, one of the things I love about being in a business school that, attracted me to come here partly is that the idea, I think the grain of important, valuable truth to the what are you doing in the world is that your science and your research has to be connected to the real world, or at least should be in most cases, right? Sure, maybe pure math, right? There are a couple of exceptions to that, but the the idea that you know what happens in the real world is really important to understanding what we're studying is kind of automatic in a business school in the way that it often isn't in other parts of universities that I've been in. So for example, when I ran a center when I was at the University of Colorado, where we used to have, what I thought were some pretty great speakers. So, as a social science, environmental social science center was probably the purview. And so we had two members of Congress talk about how they collaborate across party lines on climate policies. One was a Democrat, one was a Republican. We had the chief sustainability officer of Nike. We had somebody who was a former member of Congress that had environmental legislation that she had managed to get in the 90s, both Al Gore and Newt Gingrich to co-sponsor, right? So just some really cool stuff. And my direct report, the institute director that I report to was super supportive of this stuff. But there were a couple of times that I would get questions from people on campus of like, what's the academic value of this? And I remember one time, I was in a meeting with somebody who was raising these questions, who's also kind of high up in the university, and then my institute director was supportive. And I said, if I bring a political science professor to give a talk on how Democrats and Republicans in Congress collaborate on environmental policy, everybody would think that was great, right? And they're like, oh yeah, of course. Okay, but I bring sitting members of Congress who are actually doing it, and somehow that's a problem, right? uh, and then the other analogy I liked, the director of my institute is a cryosphere scientist, so studies ice, right? And whenever he needed help, kind of sticking up for me in these kinds of conversations, I would sometimes ask him, is going to look at ice and see ice and touch ice important part of being a cryosphere scientist? And he's like, oh yeah, of course. Right? And it's like, this is the same thing, right?
Yeah, right.
So I just, if I just think about like some of the speakers that we've had come through here, some of the partnerships that you've built, just the, the career days, there's all these kinds of opportunities that we have to interact with real business people. And I can't help but think that that's got to make our research better, in addition to being super valuable for our students. I don't see it as necessarily being a tension, except I do think it creates tensions in the fields that have more of an activist orientation, where it's sort of in one ear, you're telling them, don't be activists, don't be, politically biased partisans. And the other ear saying, go change the world, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. The one other real enemy of this, the push towards greater engagement and impact, which land grants are doing, in spades. I think the real target of some of it is just this esoteric focus on citations and just playing the academic game, and then nobody cares about or has any idea what you're writing about. Like I think about my advisory board, and when they're trying to understand what some of our scholars are doing, if I can't transmit what they're doing, or if someone can't, and it's knowledge for knowledge's sake over here that is staying on the shelf, and it has no real application to anything else that the college is doing. That gets really tricky to explain, and it's not only tricky to explain to our advisory boards, or to people upstream in the university. Imagine the taxpayer. And so I think some
Right.
of this is kind of a natural reaction to something we might talk about in more detail, which is just this issue of trust in higher ed. And so the activists have hijacked the trust factor, but then to some extent, the scientists and the researchers and the scholars who just have zero interest in communicating what they're doing to larger audiences are a challenge too.
Okay, I do want to zoom out to higher ed in general now. Maybe a follow-up question to bridge that is, which I don't actually think is as relevant in business schools, but I think is super relevant in other parts of the university, is there is there are many examples of pure research whose value was enormous and only became clear much, much later, right? So physicists wanted a way to talk to each other, and then we have the internet, a decade or two later, right? Uh, there was, I think her name is Katalin Karikó, right? Was working on this weird mRNA stuff that her colleagues kept being like, "You really shouldn't work on that. You're not going to advance." She kind of, almost was pushed out of academia, kind of doing these soft money research jobs, and then all of a sudden, she wins the Nobel Prize for this technology that gave us the COVID vaccines. May be on its way to, almost curing several deadly types of cancer, right? So if we if we always hold ourselves to the standard of I have to be able to explain the utility of this thing that I'm doing today, how many internets are we going to miss? How many mRNA are we going to miss? How many penicillins are we going to miss? Wasn't that just somebody like playing around with a fungus, right? uh, so, so how do we think about that? Like when you're talking to, stakeholders, donors, parents, the government, how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think that one of the lasting values of a university is we are able to pursue a long run game and a long game when it comes to what we're doing. We've withstood the test of time, and we have professors who are largely here for the bulk of their careers at one place, just ideally pursuing truth. And it may take a really long time to get to the discoveries you're describing. In terms of this pressure to what have you done address what have you done for me lately, I'm a proponent of just kind of a portfolio strategy. You can have some things that are really long term, like there are bonds, and they may produce unbelievable discovery, or I don't know if they're bonds actually, if they're going to be big discovery, but things that are very long term oriented in terms of the project horizon. But then you need some people who are having impact here and now, that can basically indicate that there's some spark and fire in your enterprise. And if you don't have that mix, if you don't have the people who are doing the great work that are leading to breakthroughs, then God help us, because we need that for the movement forward of society and civilization. So if it's all just immediate term ism, then the universities start to look a lot like, I don't know, a corporate research lab, where it's just they need something like yesterday,
Right.
and that has all kinds of downsides to it. So I think that the ideal is just trying to foster and encourage some kind of balance where, guys, if we have some of this and you realize the value of the immediate term delivery, it's going to block and tackle for some of the long term ventures.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Hmm.
That you're if you have a if you don't have any pure research, good luck discovering penicillin, right?
Right.
Also, pure research is arguably where some of the positive externalities are the biggest, right? If you're doing something that, uh, an industry that doesn't have to have IRB and has way more money could do faster and better, then what are you doing also? But yeah, like you said, it's just not realistic to expect, an institution that only does peer research to, never get asked these questions. And also, I think you do want some short term wins, right? You want somebody who is studying, just like you want somebody who's studying the general principle of how you design a certain type of policy. You also want the person who's doing the analysis of what's this particular policy we're passing right now doing for us next year. So let's talk about other challenges. So you mentioned trust. Uh, Internal and external politics are, a related challenge that feeds into trust. AI, artificial intelligence, obviously. Although I think that's a challenge and a huge opportunity, particularly maybe for business schools, which we can talk about later. Uh,
Absolutely.
the enrollment cliff, right? The fertility decline. We've already, I think, passed or about to pass peak 18-year-old in this country. Uh, and then cost and administrative bloat. Is there anything I missed?
No, just buy me a drink, please. that's, that's a long list. Yeah.
Okay, so which of these is keeping you up at night the most?
I think back to then. This is kind of a thesis of who I am and what I write about and think about. It's this issue of trust and engagement between what we're doing internally, and then how it's perceived and appreciated externally. I think the biggest threat to higher ed institutions is ourselves. So it's our conduct internally, it's the knowledge that we're generating, it's our behavior when it comes to how we treat students, and then how we treat debate and disagreement in the public arena. And I think a vast majority of institutions have kind of lost their way, and they've eroded the trust that they have, if they ever had it, that they had earned, and they're riding just on some kind of like historical legacy, as opposed to just working on like those core exercises that you have to keep working on of putting putting your enterprise and your institution into constant challenge, and being a place where there's disagreement and open dialogue. And I think it's lights out for a lot of institutions because they've lost it, and good luck getting it back, because there's greater transparency than ever on some of the things they're doing. I should turn this around and ask you if that is a correct sentiment, Matt, because you've lived through some of this
Sure.
in some of your environments. But I think it's, enrollment cliff. It's just, that's just numbers and that's math. Like, we may have to downsize. We should probably have some mergers of institutions. This is something that you can work through. But when you're professing to be a place that is open to scientific discovery, but then you have all kinds of norms and behaviors that are just hostile to anything that's different, then you don't have an open environment. And I think that's a real challenge for so many institutions going forward.
Okay, so I want to get into the specifics a little bit,
You bet.
right? So, and maybe since you implied that you want to turn the question around, I'll throw in a couple of specifics and get your reaction to them. So one that's really interesting, I have a paper in review right now that looks at this in the context of climate
Hmm.
change science. So there's some pretty interesting nuances in the trust question. So Americans of both parties have very high trust in science. That actually hasn't changed that much.
Hmm.
They have very high trust in the scientific community that has fallen off sharply a little bit in the last decade, when I think we would agree a lot of these things happened or
Right.
became, acute. Um, but again, not as much as you think. Uh, there's very high bipartisan in the public support, and also in Congress, I should say, for American scientific leadership and scientific funding, which maybe has decreased a tiny bit, but
Hmm.
probably barely, if at all. And then on the other side, trust in universities or higher education in particular, as opposed to science and the scientific community, has fallen off a cliff in the last decade,
Hmm.
right? So gone from close to 2/3 uh, high opinion to close to 1/3 high opinion, right? In about 10 years. Maybe it's ticked up a tiny bit in the last year, but not that much, depending on what polls you look at. And then there's some subfield. There's not that much good data on subfields, but there's some. It's really interesting. So one of my favorite ones is, I think it's like, entomologists and marine biologists are equally trusted by Republicans and Democrats, but environmental scientists uh, and climate change scientists or something, I can't remember what the exact phrasings were, have more polarized trust. People have, there's some divide, but a smaller one on the question of, do scientists understand what's going on with climate change, and a much larger divide and lower overall trust on, do we trust scientists to know what to do about it. I guess where I'm going with is the idea that, we've lost trust or we haven't lost trust masks quite a bit of nuance that maybe suggests the public. I'm generally a proponent of the smart public theory, the kind of the
Mhm.
wisdoms of crowd. Uh, and and so maybe the public, at least on the average, intuitively understands that there is enormous value in science, and particularly American science. I mean, there's just incredible things that have come out of American science and continue to come out of American science, like mRNA vaccines. Uh, and yet they also understand that in some parts of the enterprise more than others, we've become a little bit activist. We've become, in some areas, less concerned with strictly finding and disseminating what's true, and more promulgating a particular narrative or a particular agenda that we consider to be, quote unquote, correct. And maybe in some areas, we've been policing thought, right, and scholarship. Um, there's lots of evidence that we have been discriminating for, a decade or two at least, in terms of who we hire, right? So, and if you're trying to measure like race or gender bias, you have to do these subtle experiments where you give people, the same CV, and it's John or Jennifer, right, or John or Jamal, right, and you see little differences sometimes. With political bias, you just ask people. So there are surveys that say to professors, would you discriminate against a conservative? And a third to half or more in some cases say, oh yeah, I would, right? uh, and then it's like, there's a study that just came out today from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, looking at professors' political donations nationally, and finding that the average professor who donates politically is almost, ever so slightly less progressive than Bernie Sanders. And it's like, what would we think if you replace Bernie Sanders with Ted Cruz in that sentence, right? Would today's academics really think that was okay, right? There's another survey that found 3 or 4 years ago that 40% of professors self-identify as one of radical activist Marxist or socialist. Okay, again, what would we think? What would the Harris administration think if it was the same statistic, but it was Christian nationalist,
Right.
far right, etc. Right? Would that really? Oh, academic freedom, that's fine, right? So, uh, I mean, have I got it right? What, is there something I'm
No,
missing?
I tend to agree with pretty much everything you're saying. I think you're correct that it's more nuanced, and this goes back a long ways. There's the before the coddling of the American mind, there was the closing of the American mind, and his whole thesis was the scientists have basically returned to their offices and continue to just pull down the curtain and get back to doing their work, and they don't even want to engage with the great fight that is happening across higher ed institutions. And I think that battle is really over the fabric of the gen ed curriculum, the core of what we're delivering, and then the trust piece extends to what you were describing: admissions decisions that parents have no faith in anymore. Where seats in medical schools have nothing to do with merit, or you're standing on a test score. The thing we wrote about, Matt, with test
Uh-huh.
scores at in the California system, like calculus not really meaning that you got through calculus anymore because of grade inflation. So um, there's this view of higher ed has just basically been hijacked in what was like a very clear pathway to socioeconomic mobility and advancement, and something that you could trust as building a strong citizenry. Now there's a concern among parents that you're sending students away to school to be engaged with Bernie Sanders activists, and I think that has gotten worse over time, and it's a significant concern.
Yeah, a couple of complicating nuances before
Hmm.
I agree with you. Uh, One is that FIRE, the Foundation for
Yep.
Individual Rights and Expression, their data on basically cancellations and cancellation attempts do suggest that starting after October the 7th, probably, and then accelerating in the last year and a half, the average direction of cancellation has reversed.
Hmm.
So you're, 2021, you were way more likely to have a cancellation attempt against you from the left. It's still the case that cancellation attempts from the left tend to come from on campus, and cancellation attempts from the right tend to come from off campus. But we're seeing just the numbers higher on the right in the
Uh-huh.
last year. And people can quibble about, like, are the degrees, the things different, right? Is the professor, who's canceled for explicit Hamas support maybe not the same as the professor who was suspended for saying a Chinese word in a class on Chinese communication that sounded like the N word, right? Which really happened at
Yep.
UCLA.
Yep.
uh, so we can quibble at all those things, but I think it's worth acknowledging that cancel culture is not a one-sided
That's right.
phenomenon anymore, and maybe the way that it approximately was 5 years ago. The second thing is that, in my experience, and if you want, in a bit we can talk about some of those experiences. I've been in some universities that were pretty left leaning before coming here, and I will say that even in a left leaning university, there's a lot of departments where people are basically still keeping their head down and doing good, physical science work, for
Hmm.
example, right? There's uh, and then there's some departments in non-left leaning schools that are doing kind of activist stuff. My general sense is the big differences between kind of what you might think of as a very left leaning university and university like ours is sort of the administration and the government, and then the undergraduate students are kind of the two biggest differences, and obviously those make a difference, right, in terms of the
Yep.
climate. Okay, but now to agree with you a little bit, you mentioned the University of California and test scores. There was a big, I think it was like an open letter from a bunch signed by a whole bunch of their faculty
Yeah, I
saying, we
saw
want,
that just recently.
yeah,
Yep.
yesterday, the day before, we want test scores back. And one of the things that they mentioned, which I think we alluded to in our op-ed, which will be linked in the show notes, also, is that there there are reports of, in some of these selective UC schools, of sizable populations of students who are coming in with 4.0 high school GPAs in math, and then having to take remedial classes when they get to college that are covering things that are middle school level, or in some cases, according to the letter that just came out recently, elementary school level, right? So there are high schools that are sending kids to universities saying, you have aced math at the high school level, and they're not at grade level, for middle school, right? That is nuts. And I think one of the things that it speaks to is there are some real ironies, I think, in some of this stuff, right? So, Musa Al-Garbi and Rob Henderson have great books about how there's kind of an elite status competition, performative aspect to a lot of this activism, and it's pretty detached from the interests and mindsets and concerns of the communities that are supposed to be about. But just to kind of drive some of those ironies home, right? So number one, you're talking about test scores, right? The idea that we're gonna, get rid of the test because we have outcome disparities that must reflect bias. How can you believe, on the one hand, in systemic oppression, right? And then on the other hand, not believe in kind of genuine disparities at the end of the pipeline, right? Like, and I'll say, it's a pretty moderate, hardly kind of ultra progressive person myself. I'm Canadian, a real Canadian. When, you know, here it's not so bad in Laramie, but there are some places that I've lived in the United States where the just disparities in school quality across different neighborhoods are frankly shocking to me,
Yeah.
right? Like when I was living in the Denver area, there's an invisible line that cuts Highway 36 in half, kind of between Denver and Boulder. And when my wife and I were looking at buying houses when we lived there, one side of the line, you've got schools with excellent outcomes, very little diversity. And on the other side, you have the opposite. right? And how could that not be? We can debate about what the root causes of those disparities in school access and school quality are, but how could that not produce real differences in preparation,
That's
right?
right.
And and so to my eye, like, approaches to social justice that just try to paper over that basically by
Right.
saying, well, the test must be biased, right? It's like you're not looking at the actual thing that's causing the problem that you claim to care about. And then, even worse, I think, is some of the kind of anti-police stuff, right? The which, by some estimates, caused thousands to tens of thousands of extra deaths, through increased crime and murder in most, disproportionately affecting the very sorts of disadvantaged communities that this activism is supposed to be about.
Yep.
And then at the same time, we're being lectured by activists about how impact matters more than intent, right? Like, it just, anyway, I find some of the ironies fairly breathtaking.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would agree on the,
yeah.
on the test measurement one too. Wouldn't you rather have the data and use I don't understand the strategy, so wouldn't you want the data from your neighbors across the highway and use that to inform the argument instead of putting your head in the sand and saying, oh, the data's flawed, or I don't get the means ends calculation being made
Well,
in some of this.
and as we've alluded to in our op-ed that we wrote in Deseret News, it's actually worse than that,
Yeah.
right? And we've covered this on this podcast in episodes 9, 10, and 11. Um, you could make a reasonable argument that it's going to be very hard to fix in a short period of time all of the problems that led to the disparities in school quality that I described, in Denver, that are probably even worse in other parts of the country. However, and maybe it's also hard to say you're going to, in a tight fiscal environment, we're going to get more money for schools. However, there are places that are doing way better right now, despite being in the case of Mississippi, one of the poorest states in the union, right? With not very high spending for student by national standards, that are having a huge impact, especially for most disadvantaged students, right? So Mississippi, the so-called Mississippi Miracles, they went from, I think, 40. If you look at their fourth grade reading outcomes, controlling for socioeconomic status of their students, they went from 49th to first in the country in something like 10 years. And Alabama and Tennessee and Louisiana have started copying their model with some success. That's reading. Math, Quebec has been crushing the rest of North America for decades in math. In both cases, how they're doing it is common sense, right? It's evidence-based curriculum, intensive teacher training, high standards, not low standards for students and teachers. In we had somebody on, Shaka Mitchell, who runs charter schools in Tennessee. We had him on in episode 11, and he talked about how you can build trust relationships with families to get family buy-in, but also not papering over failure, right, when it happens. So Mississippi, one of their big interventions is if kids don't make grade level in third grade, they repeat third grade.
Yeah.
Quebec has, I think, a south of 70% high school graduation rate, because despite having by far the highest math PISA scores in North America, because they have a provincial exam, and if you don't pass it, you don't graduate from high school. And so if you graduate from high school in Quebec, you are, certifiably at grade level in math and reading. Anyway, we could go on about that little nuance in education, but let's go back to trust. How do we find our way back?
I think we're trying to do some things here at the university that are modeling, what restoration of trust looks like. So it's, first and foremost, ensuring the environment is one that allows for free speech and that basically plants a flag and says, this is a campus where ideas will be, what's the Chicago president's line to students when they first arrived? If your feelings aren't hurt or if you're not offended each day, then we're doing something wrong, and just reestablishing that that's what the environment is. Um, you're more than equipped to handle this, students. One of the things interesting in Jonathan Haidt's recent brouhaha with NYU is
Yeah.
that his thesis in the coddling of the American mind is that kids are resilient and can handle this. So it's actually a compliment to you, students who are 18 and 19. You're not snowflakes. You can handle this environment, and we're confident that you can thrive in it. So, just a reestablishing and asserting that the free speech, that the First Amendment matters, I think is part of this. And Wyoming has done a great job on that front. And then, I think just the continuation of just lifting the lid on some of these really egregious things that we've seen when it comes to admissions or when it comes to hiring decisions and policies. And if it wasn't policy, it certainly was norms that were in place that just basically need to be exposed so that we can say yes, it happened, and now let's have a reset. And I don't know that we're there yet. I mean, one of the things that's been really interesting in watching, I mean, DEI in many respects is dead, but is it really, or is it just kind of hanging out, and we'll see what happens with an administration post Trump? And there were parts of DEI that are very important. I think the principle of inclusion is something many of us could get behind, but it got hijacked and went too far in a lot of ways. So um, that restoration of trust involves, again, going back to that core exercise theme that I mentioned earlier, just being disciplined and just making sure that there's good behavior being modeled, day in and day out.
Yeah. So I want to unpack a couple of these things. First, just to build on your shout out to our university, one of the things that our university did that I haven't seen anything close to it anywhere else in the country is when we started to get scrutiny about DEI, there was a report that the president commissioned that basically said, here are all the things that we do under the banner of DEI. Here are the kind of 6 or 7 that we think you actually have a problem with, hiring policies that violate federal law, unsanctioned land acknowledgments, DEI statements. Okay, but then also, here are all the other things that we don't think you should have a problem with, and you probably don't have a problem with, like ADI compliance and
Hmm.
working with veterans and first gen students and things like that. I just thought it was, I mean, first of all, I thought it was really refreshing that they admitted to the bad stuff, right?
Yep.
I've seen so many schools like, we're changing our policies just because of federal scrutiny. But actually, we weren't breaking the law, but we're still going to do an overhaul of the policies just in case. It's like, okay, come
Yep.
on.
Nobody's going to lose their jobs, and we're just going to keep on
Yeah.
going.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
put a pin in that because I'm going to come back to that. But the other thing that really impressed me, besides just admitting to the things that had gone wrong, was then also making sure to point out there's a whole bunch of stuff that we do that got swept under this banner of DEI that really shouldn't be divisive and are just about you know creating opportunities for everybody,
Absolutely.
right? And we're going to keep doing those things. And so I thought that was just a great way to lower the temperature. Okay, let me come back though to the bad stuff, right?
Hmm.
So I think one of the tensions in this big national debate about how much intervention do we need or not need from outside, uh, boils down to personnel and accountability, right? So people will say personnel is policy. So you've got all these people who were doing it a certain way. In many schools and many departments, you had a wave of hires that were sort of explicitly for activists, sometimes intentionally, sometimes sort of as a way to get around discrimination laws, right? Uh, and so, you've got people who are critics of universities on the right and the center saying, okay, personnel is policy. You've got all these people who sort of were fine with doing it the way we were doing it in 2021. You know, uh, yeah, how do you fix it without upsetting the apple cart? And then at the same time, there's the accountability discussion, right? The On the one hand, one of the tensions I see, for example, is like on the one hand, I think if you don't want something, particularly something that was breaking a clear rule or law, to happen again, there's got to be some accountability, right? So, you know, hypothetically, right, if a provost creates a hiring program across the university whose express purpose is to discriminate on the basis of race and gender, um, I think that provost should probably lose his job, right? Um, on the other hand, you know, may or may not be talking about a real thing that happened, right? uh, on the other hand, right, if you say we need to discipline every faculty member who participated in that program, that's like 70% of the faculty members on campus at least, right? Uh, and I don't think that that's fair.
Mhm.
so, so yeah, how do you think about this? Like accountability and personnel.
Gosh, big topic. I think you're raising a very interesting point on just how much has the tide changed right now. If personnel is policy, which is, I love that point. Um, Things have gotten exposed. Some behavior that was probably in violation of the law in many cases occurred. Um, I have not seen a lot of like follow through in terms of accountability across places that were blatantly doing it. And I'm thinking
Yeah,
here of many of the different headline stories and universities that I know well, people within those universities that I know who are party to some of the activity, and it's appallingly bad. Yet uh, life goes on, and it's just kind of a oops, we got caught, and we won't do it again, we promise. But will we just actually get better at it, or will we outwait this wave of that is intolerable and you cannot do it? I don't know. I mean, it's one of these that is kind of in the we shall see in the future category.
yeah, and I think a lot is going to depend on how you know parties are going to have different positions over time on different issues. But let's just, as an exemplar issue, right, look at uh, discrimination, right?
Mhm.
The We shouldn't be discriminating in on the basis of race and gender in hiring faculty, right?
Yep.
The My read of Title VII is that's been illegal since the '60s, right? Uh, my read of the policy at every university I've ever been in suggests that it's against university policy and faculty are required to report it.
Yep.
Uh, Maybe some people disagree with that, whatever. But my sense is stuff like that and stuff like, free expression, pluralism, if not viewpoint diversity, we can. I don't know if will have time to get to this, but I think viewpoint diversity is actually a very hard problem to solve just mathematically.
Yep.
Um, my sense is that schools like ours that are in red states where the main government that has the power to influence us is actually the state government, more so than the federal government. I don't think we're ever going back to the old way of doing things.
Mhm.
I think that, you know, regardless of what happens in the 2028 election, regardless of who the next Republican presidential nominee is, uh, we're never going back to 2021 here, right? I think at some level, even, the people on campus who would like us to go back to 2021 know that if we did, it would cause us problems. My sense from colleagues of mine at schools in bluer states is that there are a lot of people who would like to just keep their heads down and ride out the Trump administration and see what happens,
Yep.
right? And sort of see what they can get away with afterwards. And then underneath that, there's a little bit of, some faculty, the SATs in the University of California is a great example of this, right? There's even in campuses where everybody leans left, there are still some things that went on in 2021 that most people don't agree with, right? And many people were sort of too afraid to stand up to at the time, but are going to stand up to now. I think bringing back SATs is a good example of that. Um, Hiring discrimination, to be honest, I'm not totally sure which way that one's going to go in left leaning universities. I think it maybe depends a little bit on how the next presidential administration deals with it, right? If it's a Republican, are they gonna, be as tough on it as the Trump administration is? If it's a Democrat, right? I mean, for example, a lot of the stuff, increased dramatically during the first Trump administration. A lot of people forget, right? Uh, so are they gonna be as tough on it? Even though for the record, I think they should follow due process more
Mhm.
to the current administration. And then if it's a Democrat, like is a Democratic administration going to kind of go back to the stuff where it's sort of tacitly being endorsed, right? Like yes, Title VII is a thing, but we're also going to give grants on the basis of race, right? So yeah, I don't know. What's your thought?
I tend to agree with you that I think there is no going back in some of these states. I'm walking through in my head your thought of us doing things that were absurd here in the current environment at Wyoming, and there'd just be no appetite for it. And I think that there's there in fact there is a thesis out there that we're seeing polarization in higher ed institutions. Where you have this set of universities, Wyoming, Utah. You find it in the mountain region significantly, and then in the deep South, that are just very pragmatic about these things, and probably will go nowhere close to that line again. And then the blue states may just uh, just take a different approach. That may be the best guess that I have at this point.
Okay, I want to pivot to talking about AI and the enrollment cliff, but
Yeah.
there's a good segue here, right? So we've passed peak 18-year-old. We've probably, unfortunately, in my opinion, for the foreseeable future, passed peak international student.
Hmm.
Uh, so we have the same number of universities competing for a smaller number of students. In the South, there's this striking pattern of enormous flocks of students, uh, you know, applying to these schools. I think Vanderbilt is now one of the most selective schools in the country
Yeah.
because there's a bunch of students that don't want to go to Harvard and Columbia anymore and want to go to Vanderbilt. Okay, uh, beyond schools, you're seeing some of this in terms of just people voting with their feet, right? The one of the biggest challenges in the next 10 years for the Democrats in Congress is that they're literally losing seats because people are moving out of their states, right? Uh, I so that it seems to me, right, intuitively, that if you believe some polls that suggest that the political ideology that maybe was ascendant 5 years ago on college campuses represents between 5 to 10% of the public, there's a huge opportunity for colleges catering to everybody else, right? Not conservatives, right? We're just everybody, including conservatives, to be clear, but not exclusively conservatives. I have not yet seen direct evidence of that in the Mountain West, like Utah. I haven't seen the kind of Utah enrollment boom or the Wyoming enrollment boom that we've seen in like Alabama. Is that football? Like, what is that like classic Southern Greek culture? Like, why do you think that is?
Gosh, you hit on the two biggies, Matt. I think SEC football is a different animal, and then Greek life in the South is something spectacular. I mean, Texas is it should be thrown in there too with the deep South in terms of attracting just crazy and inordinate numbers of students from the Northeast. So it may be as simple as beer and circus. I mean, you and I have written on this a little bit, and I think it's just this pragmatism. So Utah, for better or worse, is going to have just some added blemish of it's more conservative as a state. It's a state where there's a lot of LDS. Like that may just be some headwind that it can't overcome in terms
Okay,
of
but
being
more
a magnet
conservative than
for students.
Alabama, really?
I don't. Yeah, in some ways, I think that if you're a student from the Northeast and you can go to public, um, Baptist State, Alabama, or yeah, that's a tough one. In terms of are they more conservative? I think there's just something with Utah that's making it a little more difficult to get the same wave that the Deep South is in terms of like the fun factor.
Yeah. Okay. Follow up question that's less about politics. In a lot of places, I believe, including here, business majors are increasing
Mm-hmm.
in contrast to most of the rest of the university. Why do
Yep.
you think that is?
That's just a simple transparency of data now. I think parents are very awake to value and ROI on degrees, and business degrees are holding up really well. I mean, we make it part of our advertising campaign to students and parents is we will get your student a job. They will enjoy pretty high starting salaries coming out. This is our, kind of bond or our commitment to your student coming here, and we're unapologetic about it. So you
Right.
look at some of these schools, they don't, and I visit them, for AACSB visits. They don't have great data on job placement. They don't know what their students are making. And that's in the business school. Imagine the rest of the university where they have no idea. And I think parents catch a whiff of that and they say, oh, we're going to go over here instead. So I think that that's a part of it. Degrees in business certainly are holding up pretty well in the early phases of AI, and we'll see if it persists or not. But I think it's just really a simple story of we sell ROI, and parents are awake to it.
Okay. I want to spend a couple minutes on AI. What do you think are the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities for business schools from AI?
Oh, so I think the biggest challenge is in online delivery, and this is
Yeah.
across business schools. I think that I know you have a question at the end on what was the thing we're not thinking about the most, and one of them for me, I think, is the fact that 1 in 3 higher ed institutions is at risk of collapse, and I think AI is going to really expose the weakness of some of these places. University of Maine, I don't know if it was the main campus or one of their campuses just was exposed recently for having a student who was able to complete like an entire curriculum in 3 months. And if your online delivery is that vulnerable to just AI doing it for you, then what exactly are you delivering in your degree? So I think that this will be a real challenge for business schools when our online delivery just loses all integrity. And when it does so, what safeguards are we putting in place to ensure students are learning anything or that there's anything better than AI that we're offering them? My
Right.
daughter's taking Duolingo right now just to like learn Spanish, and she's realized that chat can do it even faster. So huge disruption to Duolingo, which is
Yeah.
struggling to enjoy the revenue it was just a couple of years ago. And I think that the parallel here to online delivery in higher ed is very real and significant. Um, I, I think that the cheating piece is rampant and something that we're also going to be really struggling with going forward. Just what you go on LinkedIn right now, and I can't tell. I think everything on there is just AI generated. Like
Right.
you're looking at everyone's posts, and you're like, oh, that's just word salad, and that's our future as professors is dealing with, a lot of I can't untangle. Um, what is legit here. And to some extent, that'll be okay because they're leveraging AI. But sometimes it's just blatantly ignoring the policies and the expectations of the professors.
The other thing I think that's really fascinating, I mean, online education, you're so right. And that's super important in a place like here, where we're the only 4 year in a large geographically distributed state. Um, and I think the answers, besides like honor lock, proctorio, right? There are these kind of tech fixes that I think we're going to
Hmm.
have to make do with for now, but the broader question is harder. I think one of the fascinating challenges, but also opportunities for the in person instruction is that we don't, in my opinion, want students to use AI as a way to prevent them from learning something, right? But I think we do want them, like AI can do amazing things, and humans and AI working together can do amazing things. And I think we
Absolutely.
do want our students to learn how to do that.
For sure.
Uh,
Yep.
and like your daughter learning Spanish, for example, right?
Hmm.
AI could help her learn Spanish faster. I've seen graduate students where use AI really productively to help them poke holes in identification strategy, or help them through like a proof, right? I think that that's not only okay, that's great, right? We want our students to do that. So how to thread that needle, I think, is really interesting. There's a professor you might have heard of at University of Toronto's business school named Kevin Bryan, who has this
No.
great, he teaches, he writes a lot about AI, but he has this class that's actually on progress that that I saw him give a talk on recently, and he was saying these are master's students. He was saying what he does for his master's students for their essays is they have to submit a proposal, then he runs their proposal through Pro AI that he has access to, and most of them don't, and to produce a version of the paper. And he hands them this back and says, look, this is what AI can do with your proposal. I'm going to grade, you can use as much AI as you want, but I'm going to grade you on the delta between what you produce and this. And so if you want to have there be a delta, you're going to have to get your hands dirty in the archives, or get on the phone, or he's an economic historian, right? So I think that's really cool. One of the things I'm going to try in my new class here at the College of Business in the fall is give students 4 writing assignments, tell them they can use AI, but they have to disclose how they used it, and then give them an oral exam at the end that's worth as much as their essays combined, where they have to give me an oral defense of one of their essays that I don't tell them which one until they're in the room, right? So the idea being, again, this is an economics class, not a writing class. So I think like teaching them how to write isn't as important for my purposes as it is for the English department, but I want them to produce good ideas that they understand and they've had a role in developing and they can defend. But sort of give them away. Anyway, we'll see how it works. It'll be a fun
Yeah,
experiment.
sounds fun. Yeah. That's great. I think that one of the things with AI that you're spot on that it's going to be really valuable is it's much more individualized education that we're going to be able to
Yeah,
enjoy. I can picture students working with 3 or 4 chatbots to make sure that they're capturing the lessons that Matt Burgess is teaching them, and your role becomes kind of facilitator over um, these really amazing students who are engaged with avatars. So I'm in the future. I'm very bullish on it, but I think it's going to look really different than models that are very stale that we're delivering right now. I mean, one concerning thing about higher ed that I just saw in a post a day or two ago is you look at job ads for administrators in higher ed, most of them right now still don't even have the word AI in them. And I think that
interesting.
that's a reflection that we're so asleep at the wheel for something that is going to have massive disruption on our industry.
Okay, quick plug for AI opportunities in business schools, and then I want to pivot to asking you about leadership before we run out of
Sure.
time. Uh, I encourage all our listeners, if you haven't already, go back and listen to episode 15 with my brother Ian Burgess, whose whole business venture is around the idea that he can get great job opportunities for undergrads that are kind of AI human collaborations in basically consulting. And when I was listening to him, I couldn't help but think, gosh, what an incredible opportunity for business schools. And here's the basic outline. If AI basically makes it very easy to become a vibe coder who's almost as good as, a software developer in a lot of areas, that places a huge premium on skills like change management, like product management, ability to customize, right? So anybody can vibe code accounting software, but who can work really closely with a construction company to build them hyper customized accounting software in a month,
Hmm.
right? That's kind of almost a real example. Um, these are all business school. These are our students, right? We could be the ones training our students to do these things and to seize these opportunities. And so I actually think, if I was in the humanities, I'd be pretty scared. Although maybe not as scared as some of them are. I actually think there's some really valuable, some of the AI stuff's exposing some really valuable human elements of the humanities. But I think has never been a better time to be a business school if we seize the opportunity. If we sort
Exactly.
of
Yep.
if we continue to be dinosaurs and sort of offer education that AI could easily replicate, we're in trouble. All right, pivoting to leadership before we run out of time.
Sure.
One of the things that strikes me about you, Scott, is you're a rare combination of somebody who can be decisive and can be visionary, but you're also very good among the subset of people who can do that. You're very good at not alienating people, right? And being kind of an inclusive leader on your team. And I actually think it's a pretty hard challenge, particularly in academics, right? So if you are making a big change to an institution in academia. Anytime you make a big change, there's going to be winners and losers, and the losers are going to be disproportionately in your organization, and the winners are going to be disproportionately out of your organization,
Hmm.
right? Because everybody who's in your organization was hired to do the thing you were doing before, right? Uh, and then throw tenure on top of that, and some of the people who are going to lose from a strategic pivot are still going to be here for 20 more years,
Right.
right? And you don't want them to have terrible morale and check out or whatever, right? Whatever they might do. So, how do you think about managing that tension?
Yeah, I think about it a lot, and I think that any success I've had is just driven first and foremost just by my own humility and the belief that I need people around me who are going to challenge. I think being an economist has been quite advantageous for me in leadership. And if you think back to like econ seminars or job talks, Matt, our discipline is just harsh and brutal. I can remember an early grad school job talk, not job talk, a workshop that I gave, and someone at the table, just when it got to the point where I was done presenting and taking challenge, just one of the first comments was, "We need a lot more Beaulier in this paper and a lot less bullshit," and it's like you're just devastated. You're like, "Oh my God, this is like a full professor who just crippled me, and I'm just a mere grad student." But um, that willingness to just take challenge head on and have the feedback that is so hard to get when you're in leadership roles because even at the dean level, you're surrounded by people who are going to tell you the thing that you want to hear. And that's like that
Right.
noise that it's very soothing. You want to just like be told you're good, we love you. And that is the thing that you have to try to actually just steer away from and be trying to welcome criticism and challenge wherever you can. So I'm really happy with my leadership team. And, we argue, we swear, we um, you know, disagree vigorously over a lot of different things, and it allows for decisions that are fairly well informed. So that's a big part of it for me. When it comes to actually making a decision, I hate the anxiety of postponing. When I feel like we have the appropriate amount of information to move in a direction, it's just time to do it. And I see a lot of my friends and in higher ed leadership positions get stuck at that stage of I need a little more information or I haven't vetted this appropriately, and they delegate the decision essentially, or they outsource it to committee or something that is shared, which means it actually never gets made. And I've written a little bit about shared governance, and it's really that simple. That shared governance is something that is shared between leadership and the faculty. It isn't that they have full control rights over the decision. It's that we talk, we listen, and we work through that dance, and then we move forward together. Once everyone has been heard, so again, I think it's the Midwestern upbringing and this desire to listen, because I'm far from the smartest person in the room, that has led to any success I've had. And trust me, I sometimes that being decisive burns you too, where you have to reverse direction and you look volatile, and that's the downside of it. But I don't like sitting on decisions, and I'm glad you're okay with it. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. My brother says that. Actually, I think he said this in the podcast. You're in business. Your success is determined not by the number of successes and the number of failures, but by the time average of them.
mhm.
And so, make your failures as quick as possible and milk your
Absolutely.
successes as much as you can. Does that principle carry over to higher ed?
Absolutely. The one thing about successes in higher ed is they're so opaque, and I personally don't spend a lot of time dwelling on success. So that is something that is actually really difficult that I have to work at. I know it's a gap for me in that we just got reaccredited. We should be celebrating. We should be singing it from the rooftops, and kind of like running a marathon and completing it and really nailing a good time. It's like, okay, that's great. Of course we did that, and I have to remember that in a lot of cases, your team needs a lot of love and praise and recognition for what we just accomplished. And it's okay to take a break and pause and celebrate that. I think that a lot of business people are that way too. They're just wired to say, okay, what's next? That was great for about 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and
No, I think you're totally right. I think academia too, the disciplinary cultures that where you don't give blunt negative feedback because it's rude, I think
yep,
stunt growth. But you also should give positive feedback, right? Because you want students to know when they have done something important and when they are doing well. You mentioned marathons. We're almost out of time. I
yeah.
did want to ask you about marathons. So, for our listeners who don't know, Scott is a pretty good marathon runner. I think you was it is it just is it the second time that you just did Boston, or how many times have you done
That's
Boston?
my fifth
It's your
Boston.
fifth time.
Yeah, and it was an okay day. Yeah.
But you have to be, again, for those of you who don't know marathon running, you have to be quite a good runner to qualify to do Boston. It's not like any schmuck can just say, "Hey, I'm going to do Boston," right?
Right.
Um, I hate distance running personally, but I also admire people who do that. I'm just wondering, can you walk us through what does training for an elite marathon look like for, say, the 2 months leading up to it?
Oh, it's exhausting, honestly. So I'm on the other side of it now, and I've had a month of just taking a break. And it's a lot of early mornings, especially when you have the jobs that we have where you're working so much. A lot of early mornings. It's this anxiety of where am I going to fit this in? So it's just one more piece of the calendar and the logistics puzzle. Mileage for me, I mean, some people get up to about 100 miles a week. I get up to about 60, and that's what my body can tolerate, which means you're running pretty much every day. You're tired. I think that the hardest thing about really intense training is you're designing your body to be fatigued, because if you can run fatigued in training, you could run fatigued in a
Right.
marathon. And that is like really weird to abuse your body to that extent. But, people do this in a lot of different domains. You look at like what Navy SEALs put their bodies through just to be ready for the actual event, or, what pilots or medical doctors put themselves through. There's a lot that comes from the discipline of doing it. And I run mainly as an outlet. If I didn't have the running, the fact that I'm okay and pretty good at it is great, but it's really just a way to get in my own head. And I'm juggling 4 kids and a busy life, but that is time where it's me, and I run because I can, essentially. So it's a lot in terms of what you have to put into it to get to the start line.
It seems to me, and this may be just an impression, I haven't run the statistical analysis, but it seems to me that competitive athletes are maybe a little bit overrepresented among some of the most successful academics. Do you think that there are certain skills and habits of mind that transfer well across these worlds?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones, at least when it comes to endurance athletes, is just this long-term orientation, and I assume that's true for some really great academics are amazing chess players, and
Yeah.
one of the key components of chess is playing it again and again and again, and just having discipline. So I think that what's getting picked up there is just conscientiousness and discipline in your habits. And if it's not something that's an athletic outlet, I bet if you were to find, if you were to poll many successful executives, it's something that they're really passionate and good about, and almost, I mean, like just narrowly obsessive. And that same obsessiveness in whatever their passion is probably what makes them really solid as leaders too.
So you've already answered sort of what was going to be my last question,
Only
borrowing from
kind of, yeah.
Konstantin Kizin, but what aren't we thinking about what should be? So let me change it a little bit and ask you, what is the opportunity that you're most excited about for business schools from the perspective of being a leader of one? And what is the most exciting opportunity about a business education that you think our prospective students should be most excited about?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest opportunity, despite the fact that we were, kind of in the muck here for part of the episode, Matt, I think that the future is one that I'm ridiculously optimistic about. I think that a friend of mine who you had on one of your podcasts, Michael Chambers, likes to
Incredible
say to me,
guy.
just wait 10 years. You have no idea what's ahead in the next 10 years. And while that's going to mean really significant disruption in higher ed, like I seriously think 1 in 3 universities is at risk of just complete collapse.
And that's just
It
because of value proposition concerns plus
Yep.
the enrollment cliff.
Yep, enrollment cliff, just relevance. Like why do we have so many universities and communities that are like shrinking and tiny?
Right.
I mean, just arguing that it's there for economic development when you have 15,000 different options isn't going to make sense. And we're about to embark on a wave where there's just so many other effective ways of getting people informed and
Yeah.
knowledgeable about different things. So I'm very bullish on the future. It's going to be one of abundance, and you and I work on like this progress and abundance theme together sometimes too. And I think wrestling with that is going to be one of the really big questions of our future: is what do we do with these tensions between we have almost everything we could want, but we still live in a finite world with finite amounts of
Hmm.
time. So studying business is going to be one of the core areas of focus, because it's all going to come back to what does the economy and the economics of this look like in a world where we have so much, and that's our future, is one with so much. And I'm sure many aren't going to believe that, but the data is pretty compelling on it.
So would it be fair to summarize as the future is one of abundance, of high tech, so we're going to need an educated workforce, of high tech where AI places a higher premium on softer, intangible human skills that business schools teach in spades in addition to the technical skills, and
Yep.
therefore we should be bullish on business schools? How did I do?
I think that's a great way to end. Yeah. So I think that's about right.
Great. Well, super interesting as always. Scott Beaulier, thanks for coming on Grounded Not Divided, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matt. I love what you're doing with this, and great to have you as a colleague in the college.
Yeah, back at you. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Grounded Not Divided. If you want to hear more episodes like this, be sure to subscribe for free on Apple, Spotify, or on the Guided Civic Revival Substack. You can also email us feedback at matt.burgess@uwyo.edu. See you next time.